I'm Reverend Cornell Carter, and we're celebrating Black History Month. Today we want to talk about Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January the 15th, 1929. He was a Baptist minister, an American statesman, a civil rights leader, and he became widely known for advocating principles of nonviolence, even in a society that had begun to witness much violence in association with the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was not just limited to the South, but in cities across our country, Martin Luther King became the symbol of change for a country that was racially divided, where there were great differences of opinion. Martin Luther King rose to the forefront of the civil rights movement to begin to give shape to it, to begin to give structure to it, that America might pause for a moment and realize that our true greatness lies in our diversity and our strength also in our diversity. Martin Luther King did not just talk about civil rights, but he lived a life dedicated to the principles of equality and justice.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
Though slavery had ended nearly 100 years before, Martin Luther King Jr. lived in a society, in a world very different than the one that you and I live in today. In fact, segregation was very real throughout his life. Even as a child, segregation was something that he confronted on a daily basis.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Martin Luther King committed his life to eradicating inequality and segregation that had become so commonplace around him. When we take a look back in our own history and we realize that Black Americans and white Americans could not drink from the same water fountains, that Black Americans and white Americans, though both paying with American currency, couldn't enter into restaurants through the same door. When we think about the foundations of our justice system, though white Americans and Black Americans fell under the protections of the Constitution of the United States, justice was dispensed in very different ways throughout our country. And so the landscape that Martin Luther King inherited was one that screamed for change, one that screamed for transformation. And Martin Luther King Jr. answered that call. His commitment took him to cities across the country. You may remember the Montgomery bus boycott, because segregation was alive and rampant in the public transit system in Montgomery, Alabama. You may remember those who walked and worked alongside him, like Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat after a long, hard day of labor. You may remember the march from Selma to Montgomery, some 54 miles, that was connected to the voting rights movement, because whites and blacks were not afforded the same rights with respect to voting. His call and his commitment was so great that it knew no physical boundaries. He answered the call wherever there was a need for justice, wherever there was inequality, wherever there was inequity. Martin Luther King Jr. had a courage and a strength that was required for that time and is still required for the time that you and I live. Martin Luther King Jr. and his associates found themselves in Birmingham, Alabama, protesting segregation. And they did so in the hallmark and characteristic way of nonviolence. But the response by those in authority was so brutal and so vicious that it caught the attention of news media and news outlets across the country. as dogs attacked citizens demonstrating for civil rights and for equality, as fire hoses were turned on those who simply wanted to receive the rights that they were entitled to under the Constitution of our great country. In spite of all that Martin Luther King Jr. endured, in spite of all that he witnessed, in spite of every tour that he took to aid in the quest for civil rights, and in spite of all that he took in and evaluated, he remained committed to seeing justice prevail in every city across our country. In 1963, he gave his famous speech, arguably the most famous one of his time, "I Have a Dream."
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Many people in our community and in communities across the country have lost their dream, have stopped dreaming, have been besieged by drugs and alcohol and hopelessness and despair. We can never afford to stop dreaming.
I have a dream.
And as we celebrate Black History Month, our challenge is to never stop dreaming. There are Martin Luther King Jr.'s right here in our community who simply need the push, the courage, the support, the endorsement, the reminder that greatness is within reach. There are no disposable people. Even the smallest child who dreams, his or her dream is as valuable and has as much promise as your dreams and mine. Our task as a community, as we celebrate Black History Month, is to encourage the next generation to keep dreaming. In fact, to dare them to dream the impossible dream. Our dreams are within our reach. Dr. King is living proof of that. Though a sniper's bullet cut short his young life on April 4th, 1968, his dream lives on today, and that speaks to the power of a dream. So dare to dream. Dream big. Dream the impossible dream. I'm Reverend Cornell Carter, and we're celebrating Black History Month.